Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started then. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. My name is Victoria Wolcott. I'm director of the Gender Institute and professor of history here at UB. Before we get started with today's event, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land upon which the University at Buffalo operates, which is the territory of the Seneca Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations Confederacy. Today, this region is still the home to the Haudenosaunee people, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and share ideas in this territory. Welcome to all of you, both here at UB and people who are coming or zooming in from elsewhere as well. Let me just say a couple things about some upcoming events, and then I'll briefly introduce our speakers today and then turn things over to them and for a lively conversation about the Nursing Clio Reader. So we have a very busy spring semester as typical for the Gender Institute. We do have two additional Feminist Research Alliance events, and these are noon lunchtime Zoom events. Katja Prosnick will be presenting on March 25th, and Mope Ugumbawale will be presenting on April 1st. We also have a signature lecture coming up in April on April 9th. This is Laura Maudlin, who will be talking about care work and the history of care work. And this is in conjunction with the Communities of Care Mellon Grant. And then finally, we have a book celebration, another book celebration of Nicole Morris Johnson's new book on April 15th. So I know that was a lot, but we have a lot of upcoming events. So do check our newsletter out, check our website for those, and do register for some of those events. We'd love to see you. So today I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce two members of the Feminist Collective that produced the remarkable volume, the Nursing Clio Reader. I realize that's in reverse there, which features new and classic pieces from the Nursing Clio blog. And I'm going to let the editors talk about the blog and the history of the blog. I'll just say now that it's a remarkable blog, and I really urge you all to check it out. Leading historians, including multiple UB alumni of history of medicine and history of disability, provide insights in the Nursing Clio book that connect past struggles with today's ongoing battles over bodies, over reproductive rights, and healthcare. This collection offers intimate, urgent scholarship that speaks to the present moment. And let me present the two members of the editorial collective who will be talking to us about the Nursing Clio Reader today. The first one is Jacqueline Antonovich, who is an associate professor in history at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where she teaches the history of medicine, gender, and politics in the U.S. Her recent publications include White Coats, White Hoods, The Medical Politics of the Ku Klux Klan in 1920s America, and she is currently working on a book with Rutgers University Press on the history of women physicians and their political activism in the early 20th century. And importantly for this conversation today, she is also the creator and executive editor, or the previous executive editor of Nursing Clio. Her research and teaching has been featured in the Washington Post, BBC, Chronicle of Higher Ed, NPR, and very, very importantly, Getting Curious with Jonathan Van Ness. I have to say I am jealous of that last one. So welcome to Jackie. And then secondly, my colleague, Sarah Hanley Cousins, who is Associate Teaching Professor of History here at University at Buffalo in the Department of History. She is the author of Bodies in Blue, Disability in the Civil War North from the University of Georgia Press, and co-author of Spiritualism's Place, Reformers, Seekers, and Seances in Lilydale, New York from Three Hills Press, which is part of Cornell University Press. And of course, she is the co-editor of the Nursing Clio Reader. She is also executive editor of Nursing Clio and producer of Dig, a history podcast. So I'm going to turn things over to Sarah and Jackie, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say.
Great. So first of all, I want to say thank you for having me, Victoria, and everyone who sort of facilitated this visit. I am thrilled to be here. And I think Sarah and I have both kind of decided that we were going to keep things rather informal because I've done a few talks about Nursing Clio over the years and specifically the Nursing Clio Reader. And I think people are generally really curious about this whole project. So I'd like to kind of keep a lot of time for questions, if possible. So I thought what we would do is first I would talk about the creation of Nursing Clio and talk a little bit about it if for those of you who might not be familiar with it. And then I think Sarah's going to handle, the how we came about creating the Nursing Clio Reader. So that's sort of the roadmap today, and then we'll open it up for questions. I guess where I would want to start is way back at the beginning. I went to graduate school to get my PhD in history at the University of Michigan. And I started my PhD career a little bit later in life. And so I started in 2011. And my second semester as a PhD student, I was taking a seminar, a public history or public scholarship seminar with the historian Matthew Countryman. And the final project or the final paper for the seminar was each of us had to sort of think through a project that would engage with the public, sort of taking our expertise, our early expertise, create a project that would engage with the public. And it was all very theoretical. We had to turn in a paper. And so I thought really hard about maybe what I wanted to be doing. And um, this was so by the time we were thinking about this project, it was then 2012. And this was an election year, it was a presidential election year. And so sitting there watching the news, watching television, and there was all of this stuff in the news about the war on women. There were a lot of pundits on television that were talking about things like what is the definition of legitimate rape, right? Specifically, one example that stands out in my mind, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but there was this pundit on television that was talking about, well, back in my day, in the past, women who didn't want to get pregnant had an easy solution to that. They would just hold an aspirin in between their legs. And so I'm sitting there as a baby historian of medicine and gender and sort of thinking about, wow, what people are getting about the information about the history of the past, history of gender and medicine is just really wackadoodle. And I thought, what if there was some sort of project that I could create that would remedy this lack of information out there? That would sort of speak back to all of this disinformation and misinformation about, the history of medicine as it, pertains to gender and reproduction and health and all of this stuff. And so my final project then was Nursing Clio. And I think what was really useful about thinking through this project in a class setting, in a grad seminar, was that I had to really think through the mechanics of how this was going to work. Anybody could go out there in 5 minutes and start a blog, right? It's pretty easy. But taking the time to sort of think through how I would want things to work in a class setting and then writing it up as a paper, I think really made me pause to think about how best to work through this project. And so what I did was I reached out to about 5 or 6 different colleagues across the country that I knew who were doing similar histories, doing similar scholarship that I was going to do. And I reached out and I had this little pitch and I said, hey, I think that this would be really important. I'm noticing that there is a vacuum of information or lack of information out there. And I think a project like Nursing Clio could be really useful. Not only that, I think it might be really necessary. And I was really just pleased that everyone I reached out to was very, very excited about the project. And so from that point on, the project moved from being this solo project that I was thinking up in my head for class. And I would really say that this became the seeds of this collaborative effort that Nursing Clio grew into. And so we all worked as a group to get the blog up and running. I will say that talking back with Matthew Countryman over the years, he has told me that out of that class, Nursing Clio was the only project that actually like came into being, which was, kind of funny. Um, and so, the project really grew from there. At first, the way we were doing editing and, we were all just writing our own essays. We weren't at that point like reaching out to other scholars to write for the blog. It was just us writing for the blog. And like I would finish a piece and I'd give it to another Nursing Clio editor, and they would edit it, and then we would just put it up. Our communication was on Facebook. We had a little Facebook group, that private group that we would work through everything. It was really kind of just a flying on the seat of our pants operation. But one of the things that we quickly noticed was that the blog uh, got a lot of attention pretty fast. Um, people, it was very validating because I think people were kind of telling me, just by the readership, that this was actually something that was missing out there. Um, and so the project kept growing over time. We started to kind of refine our editing process, refine our collaborative process. Eventually, we started asking for pitches from other folks. And the blog just really grew organically from there. What was really interesting is I'm just going to offer a couple of reflections on what it's like to create a project like this as a graduate student. And again, Sarah put Nursing Clio in the chat. So if anybody wants to pull it up, you can see it. So again, I started this project as a second semester PhD student. And at the very beginning, I feel like I had a few people who were very encouraging, like Matthew Countryman. On the other hand, I had a few faculty members and a few of my grad student colleagues who were sort of really skeptical about the project. And I think the overall warning that I kept getting about the project is that nobody is going to see this as serious scholarship. You should be focusing on your dissertation. This is not going to ever help you get a job. Lots and lots of, I think, very well-intentioned kind of advice and skepticism. And what I often tell people now is that I think one of the things that I had going for me along the way is that, I was a non-traditional student. I was a first generation student. And so I wasn't really aware of all of the rules of academia. And one of the great things about not knowing the rules is that you're free to kind of break the rules. And I think that's actually really important, that sort of creativity and sort of thinking outside of the box, and to make an unusual project like this, bloom into fruition. Um, the other thing that I will say is that, I think I graduated 7 years later with my PhD. And by the time I graduated, Nursing Clio was a known entity in my field. And it was a very unusual experience to be editing for people who were like senior scholars, well respected in the field, sometimes even maybe occasionally rejecting pieces from like full professors for various reasons. And I feel like there was a lot of worry on my part about actually like how to navigate that, right? And that how would this eventually affect my job prospects? And as it turned out, Nursing Clio was one of the things that I got asked about constantly when I was doing interviews, not in negative ways, but in really positive ways. And so I think Nursing Clio over the years, just this past year, we won the Rosen Prize at the American Association for the History of Medicine. Um, and it's been a joy to be at the helm of creating this project that I feel has been really useful in sort of becoming a publicly accessible project that speaks to um, present day issues that, people are always looking for, like, well, how did this become what it is? How did abortion become legal in the US and then become illegal, right? And then, as an example. So I feel like I've already talked quite a bit. I have lots more to say. But what I will say is that after, being at the head of this project for many, many years, um, I decided that, I think it was time for a fresh voice to sort of take over the project. And I could not think of a better person to take over than Sarah, who's been the executive editor for the past few years and really taken the blog to new heights. And was at the helm of creating the Nursing Clio Reader, which I know you're going to talk a little bit about. So I'm going to turn it over to you for a little bit.
You're so nice.
It's true.
That would be if I should be called a fresh voice. I joined Nursing Clio very close to the beginning. I think I started writing for the blog in 2013, which would have been just a few months or a year after it launched. So I've actually been with the project for a really long time. And I just wanted to add on to a couple of things that Jackie said and then talk a little bit more about the reader and how the reader came into being. And then we really hope that you'll have questions and things that you're curious about that we can talk about more in sort of a Q&A, have a kind of a conversation about this in the spirit of what Nursing Clio is. But uh Jackie was talking about how sort of feeling dissuaded or being discouraged from doing this kind of work early in her graduate career and how maybe it would be a distraction. And I definitely I don't necessarily certainly not my advisors or anything like that were not, critical or concerned about it. But, that was definitely the message out there about these kinds of projects. And certainly also heard that, this was not the kind of thing that would land you the job or would keep you the job or would earn you tenure, right? But my perspective on that, with both this and the other project that I work on, the Dig, the history podcast, was that I was pretty convinced I was never going to get a job anyway. So I thought, this is the thing that may be able to keep me connected to this community of scholars that I think that are such a big part of my life and the work that I think is really vital and important. Not just my own personal work of being a historian and getting to do the research that I enjoy, but the research that I think will make an impact publicly on issues that are, as Jackie said, very much up for public debate and hoping that by being part of these projects, maybe I could have some kind of larger impact. So clearly it has done horrible things for both of our careers and we're suffering. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. I did I did post the link. Hopefully you can see that. And I have spared you my actual Chrome browser, which is the one that has all of the, 300 tabs open in it. This one's nice and clean for you. Um, I did post the link to the blog as well, so you could open it for yourself. But I did want to show you what Nursing Clio looks like today, and it has been through many evolutions. We've I think maybe twice now. I might be incorrect about that, but I think it's twice now that we've sort of completely shut things down, taken ourselves offline for about a month or even a couple. To renovate. Another UB history alumni, Averill Earls, is our layout editor and web manager, is largely responsible for making this blog look the way that it does now in our sort of signature orange branding. And we just published an essay this morning, so you can see, as I said, every time we talk about the blog, we have just published something that has some kind of feature image that really makes an impact. And this one is about heated rivalry, which of course you all have watched and will go home and watch immediately after this once again. I also wanted to show you our staff page because one of the things that I think is really amazing about Nursing Clio, since the time when Jackie first created the project and brought those first few people in, is that it has grown significantly in terms of who is part of this project. So we have now this huge number of editors. I think the last time we counted it was somewhere, it's like 25, something like that, overall people. And the people that you're seeing here are just the folks that are currently working on the project. And if we had another page that was all like former editors, it would, be even more significant. People who have edited the blog for a period and then taken time off or stepped away or advanced in their career and had to move on to other projects. But one of the things I value most about Nursing Clio is when those folks are done with their time serving as an editor, they do not actually leave. They may leave this page, but they do not actually leave, and they remain part of this sort of larger community, which is really part of what makes Nursing Clio Nursing Clio. So in around, I'm going to get the year wrong, Jackie, was it 2021, 2022 maybe? That
That sounds right.
Yeah, it's something like that. I don't remember the exact year, but we were approached by, it was right around the time that I became the executive editor, if I remember correctly. We were approached by Peter Miklas at Rutgers University Press, which has a series on critical histories in health and medicine. And Peter emailed and was like, have you ever considered how you might take what you do at Nursing Clio, which, as you can see from perusing the page or from, just looking at my screen share, I mean, what we do is we publish these essays, right? We publish typically one essay a week, sometimes more than that. We used to publish, what was it, 3, I think, a week. We've pulled back from that a little bit. We've given ourselves a little bit of a break. But how could we take what we do at the blog, publishing these essays that seek to draw connections or contextualize things that we are seeing in our everyday lives, especially around the issues of gender, reproductive health, medicine, and kind of provide them their larger historical context and make sense of those things for people. How could we do that in a book form? And we had thought about this a little bit before. At some point, we had this conversation previously about, perhaps turning the blog into a book of some kind. And the idea had kind of not, we had talked about it, but it had not gone very far. And so this time we thought, okay, this might be a real opportunity. We need to really think about what this would look like. And this was a challenge because the overall blog, the project, especially as it has existed for well over 10 years now, is quite broad. And we have published all sorts of things. And some of them are more sort of, historically grounded essays about, say the histories of, as the essays we just published earlier this week, histories of what happens to the remains of a miscarriage after someone has miscarried, right? Lara Friedenfels wrote these 2 incredible essays, really historically grounded, looking at the history of that process. But we have also published essays like one that I wrote about the show Nashville, when Nashville finally stopped airing, thinking about feminism and country music and this crazy hair, or this show where everyone had crazy big country hair, right? How do we take that and distill it into a book? It's got to have a clearer vision. It's got to have more focus. How were we going to do that in a way that still felt authentic and true to what the project overall is? And so I think this initially originated with one of our editors, Ari Fulton, who worked for the project for a long time. And Ari came up with this idea that we sort of that kind of snowballed, that perhaps we could take and frame the book around the reproductive cycle and have it sort of start with sex and go through the different sort of steps that we could identify as part of a reproductive life cycle or a reproductive cycle. Because if you were to really drill down to like the core of a Nursing Clio essay, those are the topics that we typically publish on. There's lots of different things, but like that's really the center of like our identity, our mission as a project. And so we in true Nursing Clio style, opened up a shared Google Doc and started typing and commenting on each other's ideas. And we ended up coming up with this framework that now you can see in the book, which is chapters on this reproductive cycle. So it goes sex, contraception, pregnancy, abortion, loss, birth, violence, and it ends with a section on justice. And in each of those sections, we decided that we would have a very brief introduction. So we have like there is an introduction or a prologue written by Jackie at the beginning of the book, but then each one of these sections has a introduction written by a scholar who is a leader in that field, someone whose work we really respect, and not always necessarily a sort of a senior scholar, but somebody who is really doing that work in ways that we think are really important and that they're really a leader in that field. After that introduction in each one of those sections, then we have a series of Nursing Clio essays. A Nursing Clio essay typically is no more than 1,500 words. So there's a lot of essays in this book. And it even can look sort of like, oh, wow, like almost sort of, if you look just at the introduction or the table of contents, like maybe a little overwhelming, but it's because they are all very short, very concise, very tight, very to the point. And each section is a blend of old essays, meaning essays that had been previously published on the website, sometime between 2012 and, and 2022, I guess, 2023. I think one of them is the Udotaries is the most recent. I think that one may have been published in 2023. And then it's also those are augmented by essays that we commissioned specifically for the book. So we went through and we identified essays that we thought, that we'd already published that we thought fit into this framework really well and exemplified what we do, especially on these particular topics. And then as we looked at that, we noticed what the gaps were in that. What are things that we do not have essays on? What are things that we feel like this volume wouldn't be complete, like this section on pregnancy wouldn't be complete if we didn't have an essay on, whatever the topic was that we felt like was missing. And then we started going out and searching for people and trying to find people to write for us. And anybody who's done an edited volume knows that this is a lot of work. I'm working on a separate edited volume, and I would say it was a lot easier to get people to write for Nursing Clio because they were so short, right? Because they were less than 2,000 words, and they allowed people to be sort of more creative and to think about their fields within, with connections to our modern day issues or to news items. And so many of the old essays are what we would refer to sort of internally as like our classics, are those essays that we would associate very strongly with what makes Nursing Clio. What is an essay that we would give to somebody to say, like, if you want to know what Nursing Clio is, read this piece. For me, one of those essays is one that is in the book, that is Shannon Witheycomb's essay, My Story of 20 Weeks, which is about her experiencing having to terminate a late stage pregnancy. And it is immediate. It is emotional. It is very powerful. I assign it to students regularly, and they get a lot out of it. It makes for really powerful and worthwhile conversations. So we wanted to take some of those like classics and then pair them with newer essays that would allow us to bring in some topics that maybe the blog had not published on yet. One of there was a couple of challenges inherent in this, in turning the project into a book. one of those challenges was timeliness, right? Many of those essays that we had published in 2013, 2014, 2015 were now really out of date. Um, and not because they were bad, and not even because they were connected to things that were happening in the news, actually. Like you might think that that's why we thought they were out of date. It's actually more because of Dobbs, as Jackie alluded to. During the process of talking about and bringing this book to fruition, as you all are aware, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health was issued in 2022. And so many of our essays that were about um, trying to sort of be a warning about what might happen in a future where Roe was no longer in existence were suddenly like almost invalidated, right? Like, okay, this thing that we've been warning you about for 10 years, now that has actually happened. And we have to go back and like, if we want to include those essays, we had to have people look at them again and revise them, right? So we did all of the classic essays were sent back to those authors, and authors did have an opportunity to change them, to update them. We had an opportunity to edit and offer revision suggestions to make sure that they were that they had an opportunity to change them based on where we were now. One of the other challenges, though, had to do with authorship. And in fact, this is my favorite thing about this volume. So, Nursing Clio, you know, when Jackie and I do these kinds of talks, when we talk about this sometimes, like sometimes this makes us feel just a little bit weird because like yes, she's the executive editor emerita and I am the current executive editor, but that I don't want to say is meaningless, but we are an editorial collective. We do not make decisions on behalf of the blog. The editors make all of the decisions together. And people are able to, if there is an essay, for instance, that comes through the pipeline and one of our editors has an issue with it, is concerned about it, we all stop, right? And we all slow down and we all go back and we reread that essay. We do everything as an intentional feminist collective as much as we possibly can. It's not to say we don't make mistakes, because we absolutely have, but that is our goal. And so when you are going through the process of publishing a book, you have to do things like paperwork, and the paperwork has to be signed by individuals. And so Jackie, myself, and our former managing editor, Laura Ansley, signed that paperwork, which meant to Rutgers, we were the editors, we were the authors of the book. And as we went along, as our conversations developed about what this project was and how we were going to handle it, actually sort of late in the process, we had this conversation about authorship and whose names were actually going to appear on the cover of the book. And if you see if you look at the cover here on the shared screen, you'll see that it is credited to the Nursing Clio Editorial Collective. We actually, before we wrote this book, did not actually call ourselves that. That was a name that developed in the process of writing the book. And we were thinking about how do we refer to this thing that we are in a way that indicates that we are all kind of equal in this authorship. And we looked to things like the Boston Women's Health Collective, right? And books like Our Bodies, Ourselves, like that was what we tried to pattern ourselves off of. How did they handle authorship, right? It was authored, it was handled, or it was credited to the collective. And that has we got Rutgers to agree to that. It was a little challenging at first, not because they were not amenable to it, but more because there was actual nuts and bolts questions about like when this, I can't remember what the term is. It's like when this goes into like the Library of Congress or something, it has to have like an author. And like there were these questions that like people weren't totally sure how to answer. So what that means is that, when I was unboxing the books that arrived when it first came out in the fall, my husband looked at the book and he was like, but wait, your name's not on this. And I was like, yeah, that's the whole point. right? Like I'm proud. I'm glad that my name is not on this book, even though um I put a significant amount of work into it. It was work done on behalf of the collective. The other thing that that means is that we were clear from the beginning that this is everyone's book, including people who work, who are our staff, who are our editors, but perhaps we're not actually super active in the editing and pulling together of this volume. So we have editors who maybe just came on in the past few weeks. I consider this book equally theirs because they are part of this editorial collective just as much as I am, having been there for 10 years. So I will end there, and I will Jackie and I are both happy to talk any more about the project as a whole, about the Nursing Clio Reader, about heated rivalry, whatever you would like.
Can I just circle back on a couple of things that you said before we open it up to questions? Just because if I
Yeah.
don't, I will forget, and then I'll like at 2 a.m, I'll be like, oh, I should have said this. And then maybe we can open up for questions. One of the things that Sarah was talking about in the Nursing Clio Reader, she mentioned the Shannon Withycombe book essay about pregnancy loss. I think one of the hallmarks that I think both Sarah and I kind of didn't articulate about Nursing Clio that I think makes it really special, Shannon Withycombe is a historian of miscarriage who had a late term miscarriage, right? And so one of the things, our tagline is the personal is historical, sort of a play off of the very famous feminist personal is political. And so one of the things that Nursing Clio does is write these, we have people who write these just straight up history essays, right, for the blog. But we also have these personal essays where, we as historians are living this life too and experiencing this political climate, and our bodies are doing things, and we have very particular thoughts on these things that I think create some of our most powerful essays. And when we wanted to put the reader together, it was really important for us to include both of those types of essays, just the straight up history essays, and the ones that are written from more personal perspectives. And we thought that was really, really important. The other thing that I wanted to add, I think I have to tell the story, Sarah. There was an additional chapter in the book called Parenthood that had to be that had to be pulled at the last minute because we were so excited about this book that we were not paying attention to our book contract at all that had a word count. And we were significantly over word count to the point that our very, very normally friendly editor, Peter, had to he was basically like, well, you have to cut this down. Otherwise, this book is going to cost $50, right? And so we really had to then, like, again, jump back in as our collective and figure out what we were going to do. And at first we were thinking, well, maybe if we pulled one essay from each one, or maybe if we went through and shortened all the footnotes, and we did do that. We went through all of the essays and figured out how to like cut some of them down. But in the end, we were still over word count. And in the end, we decided the thing that would be the least disruptive would be to remove the parenthood chapter. And that was for two reasons. One, it seemed like it still made this very easy sort of framework of the reproductive cycle. It wouldn't be too disruptive, whereas like you couldn't take out childbirth, right? The other part of taking that out was that many of the essays that were written in the parenthood section were Nursing Clio editors or people that we've worked with before or had essays in other parts of the of the book. And so it seemed, again, sort of along with that collective, we wanted to make sure that our writers were, that weren't part of the editing process were most highlighted. And so some of us took an L for the team and just pulled that whole section out. So I thought that was really important. And then the last thing I want to say before we open it up to questions is, as Sarah was sort of talking about, our blog covers quite a bit. She was talking about, we have the history essays, we have the personal essays, and then, very randomly, we have like this essay on Nicki Minaj, or like, just something very that seems random and like not in our wheelhouse. And I just wanted to comment on the history of that and why we do that. Um, Part of that, because it caused a little bit of an identity crisis for us in the very beginning, um, because there was, and I think fairly so, there was a certain, some editors in the beginning were like, we need to be a very focused, we're only going to cover gender and sexuality in the history of medicine, and that's it. And if we publish outside of that, then we're just like this mishmash, curiosity shop or something. And, I think that there are many of us, including myself, who really pushed back on that, because I think, and as I often tell my students, the history of health and medicine in the body is all around us, and it is in unexpected places. And in fact, historians have a lot to say about things that maybe upon first glance are not, strictly within that wheelhouse. Um, but they are. And in and I think that created a lot of flexibility early on for people who are like, well, I like Nursing Clio, but I'm not sure that I could write for them. But I have this really cool idea about this show that's on television right now. Um, and also, I think my sort of, when I was executive editor, my sort of perspective was that it keeps the blog super duper interesting. It keeps it very, like, who doesn't want to read an essay about heated rivalry, right? Written by, I think, I'm assuming a historian, right? I don't know who wrote that. But so it served several purposes, and I'm glad that we do that. So yeah, so I'll stop there and I'll shut up, but I'm happy to talk about any of that.
Thank you both so much. Yes, we will open it up for questions. I might ask a question just first, just because take the prerogative of leading the discussion here. You can also put questions in the chat. That would work as well. I was just going to ask about just thinking about the content of the blog and the book. If you can point to essays that were particularly that the media maybe picked up on and did something with, or that had higher more eyes, more popularity. I'm sure there's metrics for all of this kind of thing that landed particularly powerfully with people.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you have any on that you can think of offhand?
Yeah, yes, I was just going to I'm just looking it up if I can, because I can't remember the title.
I wonder if we're thinking of the same one, because I'm trying to think of the title and I'm looking through the table of contents. Are you talking about the Irish one?
That's a good one. You talk about that one first.
Well, I got to find the title of it. I can't find the title of it. Do you remember what it is? Because it's like a complicated title.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact title off the top of my head, but it is an essay by Cara DeLay, who was a historian of Ireland, and it is about the practice of symphysiotomy, which is I'm gonna butcher this, but it's the practice of essentially breaking a woman's pelvis, cutting the ligaments in the pelvis to aid in childbirth. And it's an incredible. Oh, the name of the essay is "And the Torture Began," if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And it is a horrific. It's a horrific procedure that has lifetime consequences and that people deal with for the rest of their lives. This one was a favorite internally. Like, a favorite is a horrible thing to say about an essay on such a horrific topic, but it was such a powerful essay. We knew that it was being assigned regularly, but in an odd turn of events, there was a conversation somewhere on Reddit about, wasn't it the history of the chainsaw, Jackie?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, you don't know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So I'll fill you in. There was a conversation somewhere on Reddit. R.E. Fulton discovered this about the history of chainsaws. It was some historical meme or something that someone posted, and someone said, "Oh no, there is actually, I just looked this up and there's like a real history to this," and posted that essay, the symphysiotomy essay, and it truly went viral. And we
Mm.
had like just a crazy amount of traffic to the website, all coming from Redditors looking to find the real history behind this meme that they had seen. So that is one way that it has been that we've seen sort of individual essays really take off. Did you have something you were going to add to that, Jackie?
No, I mean, I was just going to say it's interesting because people who've read because that essay is in the reader too.
Yes.
And that is the one essay that people who've read the reader come and talk to me about. So it is still, even in print, is resonating. And that was one of the concerns when we were putting the book together. And I'm so thankful that Peter did not have that issue, about like, well, these posters are already on the blog. So why would we create a book, right?
Right.
And the issue with that is, well, and I would, the answer to that is that the blog has been around for 10 years, and it's really sometimes there's a lot there to dig into. And so the benefit of having the reader is it's this really tight, focused collection that's really easy for people who are interested in these histories to have this sort of holistic collection. I don't know what you were going to say, Sarah, but I will say that over the years as executive editor, and maybe this isn't quite getting to your question, Victoria, but like we have there have been several times, as you can imagine, because we do write about, quote unquote, controversial topics. And there have been times where people whom we've talked about, or, family members or whatever, have contacted us and maybe not been so happy about what we've published. And I think that is a real risk when you are doing something that is taking history and sort of contextualizing it within the present moment. And the example that comes up in my mind all of the time when we are talking about this is that a few years ago, we had a historian, Andrea Milne, wrote an essay about Heimlich, the guy who invented the Heimlich maneuver, right, to prevent you from choking. In his later years, he went on to do some really sketchy research and develop some very sketchy theories on HIV/AIDS. And this historian actually wrote about that for an essay. And the grandson of Heimlich contacted us um, and was not happy that we were bringing this history to light. And I think that there was some threatening language, but like
Yes.
we weren't really doing anything wrong. This was in the public record. We were just writing about it. So we've definitely had a few of those issues.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will give one other example. There are a handful of essays that I don't know. I mean, we've certainly have had essays that have been linked to from the New York Times or from the Washington Post or from various other media outlets. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is that we have a number of essays that, regardless of how old they are, continue to get um, every single day around 150, between 150 and 300 hits, regardless of how old they are. And I just went into the stats right now, and one of these just this week has already gotten almost 400 hits, and it's something that we published, I believe, in 2020, and that's an essay called "The Racist Lady with the Lamp," which is about Florence Nightingale's racism. And that is one of the essays that continues to get the most hits. It's obviously not in the volume because it didn't fit within the framework, but it was part of a series that we were doing at the time that was called Beyond Florence, which is about the history of nursing beyond Florence Nightingale and sort of more critical histories of nursing, and that really interrogated how race and gender played into the history of nursing. And this also created a lot of controversy, and we have like a genuine hater out there who's very mad at us because we've slandered Florence Nightingale. Apparently, there's some real Florence Nightingale fans out there. Um, but I find it interesting that some of those essays, and it's not just that one, there's several, continue to get readership regardless of how long ago they were published.
I think many of us now want to read that essay.
It's really good.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. More questions, comments? You can raise your little Zoom hands or put something in the chat as well. People have. Do you have any essays on the Maha movement?
Yes, actually, one of the things, one of the benefits I think of Nursing Clio being the type of publication that it is that we can get things out fairly quickly.
Right.
We can respond to stuff as it's happening. So, starting last January, and well, it may be a little bit before that, but certainly really in January, we started getting a lot of pitches about vaccines, about abortion, about birth control, these things that people were starting to get really worried about. And especially topics that historians wanted. There was like this invigoration of people wanting to take their expertise and to like share it, right? And to help kind of, I don't know, provide context for all of this. And around that time, we had brought on some new editors. One of those new editors is a historian named Courtney Thompson.
Hmm.
And Courtney, um, in some brainstorming, we thought, okay, we're getting a lot of pitches on these very kind of late breaking issues. What if we sort of leaned into that and we created a new series that was just for these this urgent kind of news? And so Courtney became the lead editor on that, and it's called Nursing Clio ER. We're very into coming up with like our Nursing Clio pun titles for our series. But ER is emergency response. So someone can pitch us through our pitch form, indicate that it's an ER post, meaning that it needs to go out really fast. And instead of going through our typical editing process where it would go through the managing editor who would then assign it to two editors for peer review, then go back to the author, then go back to the two editors. Those ERs just go straight to Courtney Thompson. She sort of vets them. If for some reason she thinks somebody else needs to have eyes on it, they will look at it too. But our goal is to have those up as fast as possible, even if it means publishing, on a day that we don't typically publish or something like that. And those have been really, really interesting. And sometimes they are, um, we've had some that have kind of fizzled. So we had a few that were pitched around the situation in the Twin Cities. And we had a series that was in process. And fizzled is not quite the right way to put this, but there was already such stress. The scholars in the Twin Cities were under such duress that it was a lot to ask them to also write for us, even if it was dispatches for the public about how they were processing.
Mhm.
And so they just never ended up totally coming to fruition, which is totally okay.
That's fascinating. I love that idea of the ER. And it's also just really interesting that you have a peer review process.
Yes.
Right? People have this sort of idea that it's a blog and it just gets kind of slapped on there. But there's a whole process behind it,
Yes.
is
Yeah.
really important.
There
Yeah.
is there is definitely a process, and it's a process that has evolved over time. Like Jackie indicated at the beginning, that process was a little more ad hoc. Um, but then as we have grown and we've brought in more editors, we now have a pretty standardized process where every essay is read by, depending on, if it's an ER, maybe it's different, but it's read by two editors. Um, it goes back to the author, they revise, it comes back to those two editors. Then it also goes through our copy editor, Lizzie Reese. Then it goes into layout, and then I ultimately am the person that presses publish on every single essay. Jackie before me did the same. So by the time something is published, it has been pretty rigorously peer reviewed.
That's great.
And just to add to that, our peer review is not blind, right? Like,
Right.
I don't know how it is done now. I don't know if you guys are still doing Google Docs or whatever, but like, the person who is like reading it and doing peer review and commenting on it, you see their name there. And, we could have made it blind, but I think it was really important for us to go in a different direction. We really look at editing as rigorous, but it's a conversation. You're having a
Yes.
conversation with other scholars. And the managing editor, we have so many editors that we have like experts in all these different fields, right? And so the managing editor will assign editors who are most likely to like understand what this person is writing about. And we really look at that as an alternative to sometimes the very, like mean, blind peer review. It's not that we're not rigorous, but you know who you're talking to and you're having an intellectual conversation with two editors or more. Is that pretty much the way it still goes, Sarah?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The only thing that has changed is the way that we organize that process. So we were doing it all in basically a big Google spreadsheet, and it was getting unwieldy. And so we recently moved to Trello as an organizational device. But other than that, like the actual editorial process is exactly what Jackie described. Yeah.
Great. Okay, do you want to ask your question or do you want me to read it? People are shy. I can read Oge's question. Okay. So Oge asked about the author DOB
Yeah.
requirements for the Library of Congress. Do you want to speak to that?
I have no idea, okay? That's such a great question. I don't I have no answer to that. I have
Okay.
no idea. I'm assuming that there is a way that they do that, that they get around that when there's multiple authors or something along those lines. I know that Rutgers was sort of like, okay, we're gonna have to figure this out, right? But I don't remember being even asked about the date of birth issue. Do you, Jackie?
I have no idea. I mean, I think God bless them, the folks at Rutgers and, Peter was the main editor, but because we're a part of a series, we also were in conversation with Janet Golden and Rima Apple, and Raina Hogarth. They were like, I think they really saw the vision that we had with and that we were insistent on it. And
Yeah.
they just said, okay, we'll take care of it. So I
Yeah,
actually have
basically.
no idea what they did.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
and there are other volumes out there. There's the keywords that came out that has a feminist collective as an editor. So there's definitely other ones.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Farah asked what has been the most surprising outcome of building this blog in terms of readership or engagement.
Jackie, you want to answer that first?
I mean, I'm hmm, I'm still surprised it, that we've been around for so long, right? Like building the blog. I mean, one of the pieces of advice that I got when I was first starting the blog, and I don't know, like, okay, if you can put yourself back into like 2012, like that 2012 was like the age of the blog, right? There were like so many blogs out there, right? But mostly they were um, single author blogs, right? There are a lot of historians out there who were just putting up their thoughts on this their internet, right? Like just just their thoughts, right? And
Mhm.
one of the pieces of advice that I got from some people who were doing that is that like, man, this is a lot of work, right? Like it's a lot of work to maintain a blog if you're doing it on your own. And so one of the very early decisions that I made, as I talked about before, was that like, many hands make light work. Like, what if there was just a whole bunch of us that were doing this, that we can kind of spread out and sort of delegate the work? And that was just wildly successful. Um, but what I didn't anticipate is the community that would be created through doing that, right? Like, yes, having a lot of editors and having this whole process written down and it makes the whole process of publishing really streamlined, and it's one of the reasons why Nursing Clio has lasted for so long. But as Sarah mentioned earlier, like when people sort of cycle out of Nursing Clio, many of them do not leave the Slack channel, the Slack channel that we have, right? Because we have ended up forming this intense, wonderful community. Our Slack channel has all of these sub channels for different topics like news or like academic talk or family life. And, I've been part of this community for 10 years, and I can say without a doubt that, Nursing Clio, the folks at Nursing Clio were like helping me on the job market. Like, will somebody look at this cover letter that I'm writing? They've given me medical advice because their kid had the same issue that my kid had. And so I just think one of the special things that can happen when you do collaborative work that's sort of intentional and non-hierarchical is that it creates community and support. One of our editors just had a baby, and we're all doing a Venmo collection, for a gift, right? And we always do that. And so that's probably the most unexpected thing. I never would have thought that when I created it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's been sort of the most personally valuable part of Nursing Clio for me, is that sort of intentional community that we've built and that support system that we've built for one another. It absolutely has been vital professionally and personally over the years. I would say for me, one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is how what I find really surprising is that Nursing Clio has, as Jackie indicated earlier, become sort of a staple in our field. So like within the history of medicine, Nursing Clio has become it has become one of the publications in our field. I mean, and I'm not, I hope I'm not overstating that or making us sound more important than we really are. But I went through some sort of career changes a few years ago and was feeling very stressed and was feeling very much like, I'm not really I'm not going to be really part of this community anymore, and people won't know who I am. And I went to an AHM, the American Association for the History of Medicine meeting, and was astonished that I everybody knew who I was, not because of where I worked or my job title or anything like that, but because of Nursing Clio and the connections that has provided within the field, not just for me, but for our editors and our writers. That's the thing that I find that is the most surprising. I would not have expected that when we were like a bunch of grad students with this little upstart, not serious blog.
And just to add to that, one thing that is also surprising, but like delightfully so, is that, Nursing Clio is again non-hierarchical, even though we have like, all of these, titles. But we also are a blog that has grad students, professors, and
Right.
people who are not even in the field at all anymore. They've gone on to do other things. And the project has been, I don't want to say solely responsible for, but like a springboard for other historians who've left academia, right? So, for example, I can give you two examples. Our prior managing editor, Laura Ainsley, she came on as a grad student from William and Mary. And, she decided, within that process that she didn't want to finish her PhD. It just wasn't for her. But she really loved working for Nursing Clio. And so she then through that process figured out that she was she's not kind of, but like absolutely a brilliant editor. And she kind of part of, she works for the AHA now for Perspectives. And, working for Nursing Clio helped her get her foot in the door for editing and publishing. And I know I'm not speaking out of turn because I know she would say this, that it's at least partially responsible for her where she works now. The other like really fun example is one of our co-founders is a person named Carrie Atkins, who did her PhD at the University of Oregon. And then she decided she didn't want to stay in academia, but she used her editing experience at Nursing Clio to get a job in tech. And she eventually became the vice president of WikiHow, if y'all remember WikiHow. She became the vice president of WikiHow. And she said that, her background as a PhD student in history, but also her editing experience at Nursing Clio, she became very valued in the tech world because she just didn't think like regular like tech people. She had that humanities brain. And so those are my two favorite stories of people who like went on to do other things. But there are a lot of others who work outside of academia.
Great. Okay, did you want to say something else? Ask another question?
Yes, I did have another question. I'm wondering if there's going to be another edition of the reader, like what happens
Oh,
next?
right.
And
Yeah.
I ask because I came across the really fascinating curation of articles on protests that Nursing Clio had on Blue Sky, and that was fascinating for me. So I'm wondering if there will be other teamed publication like this.
Thank you for that question. You played right into our hands. Um, Actually, right from the beginning when we were thinking about like how could we take what we do and put it into a book form, we identified a couple of different things that we thought would work as potential volumes. So the one that we've sort of bandied about the most seriously is the Beyond Florence series from around, I think it was 2020 that those were being published. And perhaps working with, I actually pitched this to Kylie.
I have.
Oh, we have pitched this to Kylie.
She's already on board. She's
Okay,
like,
good.
yes, I will do it.
We had an outside guest editor work with us on that series, Kylie Smith. Um, and so we've thought about, maybe that will be the next volume. But I'm glad that you mentioned, we run series from time to time, and we have lots of series that we're really proud of. That protest series from 2016, is like perhaps maybe even more resonant now than it was when we initially published them. So the one that we have on our sort of on our radar is Beyond Florence, but yeah, I think that there are other things that we could do in the future
The
if we
other
have the energy to do another volume.
The other series that I think we're all quite proud of, but has kind of a sad history, is that in 2016 we ran a series called Run Like a Girl, which was about the history of women presidential candidates. And there are more than you think there are. It was a very long series. And then, like, it was supposed to end with, we had this group authored post that we were going to publish the day after the election that was like, look, we have our first female president. And it was sort of our reflections on that. And then we didn't publish it at the time because we were all kind of like working through our feelings. And then eh, in 20 when we had the next presidential election with not Biden, but when it was Kamala and Trump, we ran the series again. And then I think we did publish, we were like, we're going to publish it anyway. And so we did publish that particular essay. But yeah, so maybe that'll be something one day in the future. Who knows?
Great. Jeannie?
Hi, sorry, I'm zooming in from my car currently, so I don't have my camera on. But thank you so much for your presentation. I just stepped down from an editorial role for a blog called Environmental History Now. And it's an award-winning blog that is run by women and was created by a graduate student about a decade ago. And when the founder basically decided that she no longer wanted to run the platform, she asked me to take over, and I took over for about 2 years. What was really unique about this platform was that, for environmental history, which is so male dominated to this day, my colleagues felt that it would be a great platform for building this community. Of course, we were all kind of giving our free labor to running the platform, many, many hours going into the editorial and review process. And we also created kind of an editorial team, a review team, a social media team. And I just wanted to ask how you deal with the funding issues, because like, once a year we would do this major fundraising drive. And it would be successful on some years, it wouldn't be successful on other years, but it became a bit of a problem of asking graduate students and early career scholars to do all of this work for very little in terms of their finances, right? And so just wondering if there's a model that you've been able to work with for a blog that has a lot of recognition, but just might not have the resources. Thank you.
Such a great question. I'm going to let you go first, Sarah, and I also have some thoughts.
Yeah, and this exactly what you described is, the challenge that we've had too, right? We when I became executive editor, we made the decision to become a 501c3, which was a long process, especially when, you don't know what you're doing like me. But we did that with the intention of doing sort of what you're describing, doing more intentional fundraising in the hopes of being able to pay not our editors, but our writers. And in order to do that, we needed to have sort of like, we needed to be a thing. We needed to be essentially a nonprofit. So we did go through that process. And around the same time, well, maybe a little bit earlier than that, actually, we did launch a Patreon. And as of right now, virtually all of the money we've ever made as a blog comes through our Patreon account. We have not yet met our goal of having enough sustainable money to be able to pay our writers, but we have made some strides. And one of the ways that we've been able to get closer to that is that we've started bringing on writers as writers in residence, and they commit to a couple, 2 or 3, 4, maybe more essays over the course of a year, and they receive a stipend for that. That stipend is extremely small, right? It's like probably laughably small, but it's like it is supposed to be a statement of our intention, right? And trying to like respect our writers. Currently, we have 2 people that are writers in residence. Lara Friedenfelds, who is an independent scholar, and so has written for us for a long time. And this is kind of moving her into this writer in residence position allows us to sort of give her a title for all the work that she's done for us, and of course to pay her a small amount. And we also have Diana Anselmo, who wrote the Heated Rivalry piece that was published this morning. The reason, well, one of the reasons that we've never had like huge success fundraising is because of the bandwidth issue, right? There are more of us than there ever have been, but we're all doing a lot. And for all of us, this is not our full-time job. And so we do now, with the 50C3, have a treasurer, and the treasurer would love to see us make more money, but that means having more, ability to advertise ourselves and to come up with extra content, perhaps to publish through the Patreon or whatever it is. And so really, we've allowed that Patreon to sit there and for people to donate to us. We have advertising on the website for it. We haven't done a lot to actually have fundraising drives or pushes for it, just because we have not, I don't think, had the ability. We haven't had like the manpower ability. We've been lucky to sort of not run into too many problems with people not wanting to work for us or write for us because we are all volunteer. We try to be super transparent about that, and that seems to help.
Yeah, I will add that, all profits from the Nursing Clio Reader go into our nonprofit to help pay for the writers. We just got our first statement back, and it's, it is what it is for academic publishing, right? But this is a really important question, and it's a perennial question. It's a question that's been it's been at our heels since the very beginning. And I'll add some extra information, some sort of historical background here is that, over the years, there have been 2 instances that I can think of offhand where well, the one that I can think of offhand, like I can remember the name. There used to be this magazine called Pacific Standard, that wanted to buy Nursing Clio, right? Like not buy it, but like
Oh,
fold us in. And they wanted to pay us a certain amount of money per month, and then we would only publish our pieces through Pacific Standard. We came kind of close to like, well, we had a lawyer look at it. Um, and then over the years, we've had other organizations that have, that have asked about, partnerships. But the problem with that is editorial control. Like the thing is that Nursing Clio writes about a lot of controversial stuff. And I think the consensus among the editors has been, at least when I was there, is that we don't want anybody telling us what we can and cannot publish or how we can publish. So we've remained independent because we can be independent and we can do whatever we want. And I think that there's a real advantage to that. There's been discussion over the years, well, not for a while, but early on about possibly doing advertisements on the blog. But then that opened up a whole can of worms about like ethics. And so we decided against that. So we find ourselves in this very, you know, kind of typical situation for these kinds of projects with academics of like wanting to maintain editorial independence, wanting to remain ethically pure, but also wanting to maybe make money. And we've never been able to figure that out. And I think Sarah, with her creation of the nonprofit, has gotten closer than we've ever been able to. But it's still a problem. And I always joke that if people come up with some sort of solution to this, I'm all ears because we would love to pay writers. We've made a decision as the collective that when the money comes in, it'll go to writers first because I do think that there is a certain amount. Yes, we work really hard as editors, but there's also at least for Nursing Clio, right? Like it means something to have it on your CV that you're an editor for Nursing Clio because it's known in the field. So there is a little bit sort of like non-payment payment for, right? Like there's a little prestige that goes along with that. So the decision has always been so far that until we get a larger funding stream, that the writers will get paid first.
other questions or comments? Does anybody want to pitch an essay to Nursing Clio? I have like ideas in my head now that I'm listening to people talk. More thoughts, comments, questions? Would either of you, anything else you wanted to bring up before we wrap up?
No, I'm just so thank you everyone for being here.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yes.
We could talk about this for all day. So I'm happy to that we're here.
Well, and I think you're going to get lots of more people visiting both the blog and the book as a result of this conversation. So thank you so much for sharing your time and energy with us. We really appreciate it. Let's give a round of applause. Virtual applause, quiet applause.
Thank you,
There we
everybody,
go.
for being here.
Thank you all for coming.